Some names echo throughout history. One such name is Pythagoras. Most of us know him for a simple classroom formula: a square plus b square is equal to c square. But behind that equation was a man far more extraordinary. Pythagoras was a mystic, a philosopher, and the founder of a secret brotherhood that sought to shape the world not through armies but through ideas. He heard music in the motion of the stars, saw moral law woven into the fabric of the universe, and dreamed of a political order guided by philosophy itself. To let the story of Pythagoras with greater clarity, I am now turning over the narration to a voice better suited for English expression.
Before the fame, there was a whisper, a tale passed down through centuries, wrapped in mystery and reverence. Legend says his story began with a prophecy. His father, Nicarchus, visited the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, where the priestess declared, "A son shall be born to you, supremely wise, beautiful, and a blessing to humankind for all time." It's a moving tale, but one told centuries later by the biographer Iamblichus. Pythagoras himself left no writings, and what survives is filtered through myth and memory. Yet we are left to ask, where does the legend end and the man begin? Yet even the name Pythagoras hints at destiny. It means he who was proclaimed by Apollo. The philosopher Aristippus once said that Pythagoras spoke truth no less than did the Pythian oracle. This was more than a name. It was a calling. Born around 570 BCE on the island of Samos, Pythagoras grew up amid trade, culture, and wealth. Nearby, in Miletus, thinkers like Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes were daring to explain the world through reason rather than myth. Anaximenes, about 15 years older, likely influenced Pythagoras, either through direct contact or through the thriving Ionian philosophy next door. From an early age, Pythagoras possessed a quiet charisma, a magnetic presence that drew admirers and followers. His exceptional intellect and profound knowledge set him apart. Gradually, a circle of young seekers formed around him, drawn not only to his teachings, but to the presence he carried. Around 540 BCE, when Pythagoras was about 30, a man named Policrates seized control of Samos. Policrates was a stern, authoritarian ruler. At first, historical accounts suggest that relations between him and Pythagoras were cordial, but over time, tensions grew. Tyranny, in every age, fears free minds. It is likely that Policrates summoned Pythagoras, threatening him to cease speaking publicly or face imprisonment. Legend tells us that, in response, Pythagoras withdrew to a cave, still known today as the Cave of Pythagoras, where he continued to teach in secret. But silence was not enough. Around 530 BCE, he chose exile over submission. He left Samos and sailed west, not aimlessly but with purpose. Many ancient stories claim he spent decades wandering the east, studying geometry in Egypt and astronomy in Babylon. But these accounts are heavily romanticized, written centuries later to retroactively explain his genius. The stronger truth is that Pythagoras did not wander. He migrated with intention to Croton. This choice was no accident. His father was a wealthy merchant who traded across the Mediterranean, and it's highly probable that Pythagoras already had acquaintances or even early disciples in Croton and nearby colonies. When Pythagoras arrived in Croton, a powerful Greek colony in southern Italy, the city was known for its athletes. Its aristocrats celebrated strength and victory. Into this world of muscle and might came a man of mind and mystery. Pythagoras's words were said to mesmerize the crowds. His public speeches drew nobles and their families to a new vision of life, one built not on conquest, but on harmony, wisdom, and number. He began by laying the foundation for a formal school in Croton, part academy, part monastery, devoted to geometry, music, and the harmony of the universe. His followers were divided into two distinct circles. The Acusmaticoi, the listeners. These were the introductory students, the outer circle of the school. They were required to observe a period of silence, sometimes lasting 2 to 5 years, during which they were only permitted to listen to Pythagoras speak, never to see him or ask questions. They focused on learning the community's moral maxims, rules, and basic laws. The Mathematicoi, the learners. This was the inner circle, the true brotherhood. After years of discipline and devotion, they were finally permitted to see the master face to face. They could now ask questions, engage in discussion, and receive formal lectures. Beyond its unique structure, the school established a revolutionary principle that shocked the ancient Greek world. It was not gender-specific. In an age when women were often confined to the home and denied formal education, Pythagoras was a radical. His school was, arguably, the first major philosophical institution in Western history where girls and boys were allowed to study together on equal terms. Women like Theano, Fintis, and Perictione became scholars, philosophers, and leaders of his movement after his death. The Pythagorean curriculum was a unified study of the cosmos through 3 great lenses: music, number, geometry. Pythagoras discovered that the harmonious musical intervals, the octave, the fifth, and the fourth, were the result of simple, perfect whole number ratios. If music, something so beautiful and subjective, could be reduced to pure numerical relationships, he concluded, all things are number. Not numbers, but number. This distinction is profound. Pythagoras and his followers weren't merely speaking of counting or arithmetic. They believed that number is the essence of all things, not just a tool, but the very substance of reality. Number here refers to a unified metaphysical principle, like energy or form. For Pythagoras, everything participates in the same underlying numerical harmony, the number. This musical insight marked the birth of Pythagorean number philosophy. The logical deduction was simple yet earth-shattering. If something as beautiful and subjective as musical harmony arises from pure number, then everything in the universe is shaped by numerical order. As later Pythagoreans would echo, number rules the universe. Number is the ruler of forms and ideas. For the Pythagoreans, certain numbers held mystical and religious value. The triangular arrangement of 1, 2, 3, and 4, known as the Tetractys, was a sacred symbol, representing the source of the cosmos and the harmony of the spheres. Later Pythagoreans introduced concepts like the golden ratio, 1.618, used by artists and architects as a measure of perfect proportion. It influenced giants like Leonardo da Vinci centuries later. And in the modern age, this ancient idea lives on. The entire digital world you're watching this on is built upon the simplest numerical language of all, binary code. Finally, this numerical relationship was applied to geometry. The most famous geometric law associated with the Pythagoreans, the Pythagorean Theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was already known and used by the Egyptians and Babylonians centuries earlier. But the Pythagoreans perfected it. If the shape of a triangle can be reduced to a mathematical formula, then every form in the universe can be expressed through mathematics, and ultimately, through number. For the Pythagoreans, geometric forms weren't just practical. They were sacred reflections of number. For example, the triangle, symbolizing 3, was seen as the most stable and elemental shape in the cosmos. This ancient wisdom persists. Today, in modern architecture and engineering, the triangle remains the essential, most stable building block for bridges, roofs, and trusses. The final and most defining aspect of the Pythagorean school was its deep moral and religious discipline. Students weren't just studying, they were committing to an ascetic way of life, guided by a belief in the soul's immortality. They followed a vegetarian diet, wore simple white garments, shared property, and structured their days around spiritual practice. They observed curious prohibitions, like avoiding beans, for reasons still debated. Each morning began with hymns to Apollo. Each evening ended in quiet reflection and prayer. Pythagoras was not merely seen as a teacher or a philosopher. To his followers, and perhaps to himself, he was a divine messenger. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a religious leader. And his school operated less like a classroom and more like a secret, mystical brotherhood. To strengthen his image of divine power, ancient biographers told astonishing stories. One of the most famous was the legend of the golden thigh. It's said that Pythagoras, in a moment of revelation, lifted his robe to reveal a thigh made of solid gold. This was no metaphor. It was presented as proof that he was more than human. To his disciples, this miraculous sign confirmed their deepest belief, that their master was a son, or perhaps a reincarnation, of Apollo himself. For them, it was not just a story, it was a revelation. The influence of Pythagoras and his followers grew beyond imagination. What began as a quiet philosophical community slowly evolved into a powerful political force. Soon, Pythagorean members held key seats in Croton's councils, transforming the city into what many called the Pythagorean Republic, a state guided not by ambition but by reason and moral law. But power breeds tension. Croton's rise brought it into conflict with its wealthy, indulgent neighbor, Sybaris. Sybaris was famed for luxury and excess. Even today, Sybarite means one addicted to pleasure. Around 510 BCE, the two cities clashed. Croton, led not by Pythagoras, but by his famed disciple, Milo of Croton, defeated Sybaris completely. Milo was no ordinary warrior. A 6-time Olympic champion, a legendary strongman, and, by tradition, Pythagoras' son-in-law. Croton's victory was swift and total, but triumph soon turned to tragedy. The victory that should have secured their rule instead sowed the seeds of destruction. The Pythagoreans had grown too powerful, too secretive, too exclusive. Their claim to govern by superior wisdom began to alienate the citizens they once inspired. To the common people, their austere moral codes felt oppressive. Soon, resentment ignited rebellion. A nobleman named Cylon, reportedly rejected from the school, led an uprising. Mobs stormed the Brotherhood's meeting houses. Fires spread. Many disciples were killed or scattered across Magna Graecia. Whether Pythagoras was already dead or escaped during the chaos remains a mystery. But his dream, the Pythagorean Republic, was over. Traditionally, historians date the fall of the Brotherhood to around 508 BCE, just 2 years after the war with Sybaris. According to later writers, Pythagoras fled the burning city and died soon after in Metapontum. But this version raises questions. Could the most powerful faction in southern Italy really have collapsed overnight, especially under the protection of Milo, the hero of Croton? And if every Pythagorean house was destroyed, how did the movement continue in Croton for decades after his death? Modern historians suggest a subtler timeline. Perhaps the revolt of 508 BCE was not total destruction, but a political backlash that forced Pythagoras into exile. The true, bloody purge, the burning of meeting houses and the Great Diaspora, may have come later, around 450 BCE, during a wave of unrest that swept the Greek colonies. This later collapse would explain why the school continued in Croton for a generation after the master's death. It gave Philolaos, born in Croton a generation later, time to preserve his master's wisdom, so the harmony of number and cosmic order could endure beyond the fall of Pythagoras's ideal republic. Pythagoras's life was a triumph of intellect and a tragedy of politics. Though the man himself died around 495 BCE, perhaps in exile in Metapontum or quietly back in Croton, his ideas were immortal. The violence that destroyed the Brotherhood's political power failed to kill the philosophy. As his disciples scattered across the Greek world, they carried the seeds of his wisdom with them. In a direct line from Pythagoras, the greatest philosopher of all, Plato, adopted the core idea that reality is mathematical and that the soul is immortal. Through Plato, the fundamental Pythagorean teaching that number, harmony, and geometry hold the key to the cosmos became the bedrock of all Western philosophy and science, influencing thinkers from Euclid and Copernicus to Kepler and Einstein. Pythagoras was indeed the proclaimed one, a genius who taught us that the difference between the noise of the world and the harmony of the spheres is simply the difference between chaos and a perfect ratio. This video only touches the surface of Pythagoras and his mysterious brotherhood. There is so much more to uncover. This is just the beginning. In the next chapters, we'll explore the numerical secret of number, the eternal balance of opposites, the soul's journey through many lives, and the wonderful women who helped preserve the Pythagorean legacy, students of what may have been the first philosophical school to welcome women.
The story of Pythagoras is not just history. It's a living philosophy waiting to be rediscovered. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe and join us as we continue unlocking the secret of ancient history, philosophy, and timeless knowledge. Thank you.